My husband of 30 years threw me out of our home and out of the company. I'd raced back to collect my things, but his new mistress blocked the doorway. A beggar now? You really are a failure. In the freezing storm, I spent my last coin making a call to my high school sweetheart, a billionaire no one knew I still had in my contacts. When his convoy of luxury cars rolled up to the house, he looked at my ex-husband and said 3 simple words. "I'm glad to have you. Stay with me until the end of my story and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels." Rain pounded the windshield as I sat in my 15-year-old Honda, staring at what used to be my home. 30 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Me parked across the street like a stranger, watching the warm lights glowing in the windows of the house I had decorated, cleaned, and cherished for 3 decades. My name is Adrienne, and at 61, I never imagined I would be homeless, broke, and completely alone. 3 weeks earlier, my husband Ruben had handed me divorce papers and an eviction notice on the same day. "You need to be out by Friday," he'd said without even looking up from his newspaper, as if I were just a tenant who had overstayed her lease. The company we'd built together, Henderson and Associates Real Estate, was suddenly his company. The house was suddenly his house. Even the car I was sitting in, I'd just learned, was registered only in his name. How could I have been so naive? How had I signed so many documents over the years without reading them properly? I pulled my thin jacket tighter around my shoulders. The heater in the Honda had given out months ago, and I'd never had the money to fix it. Money had been tight for a long time, though I'd never understood why. Ruben handled all our finances, saying it was one less thing for me to worry about. Now I could see it had been one more way for him to keep control. The front door of my former home opened and she stepped out. Cassandra, 28, blonde and wearing the silk robe I'd bought myself last Christmas. The robe I'd never worn because Ruben said the color didn't suit me. She surveyed the neighborhood like she owned it now, which in a way she did. I took a shaky breath and opened the car door. I had to get my things, my photo albums, my grandmother's jewelry, my mother's china set. Ruben couldn't possibly keep those from me. They meant nothing to him and everything to me. My legs trembled as I walked up the driveway. Every step stirred up memories. Ruben carrying me over the threshold on our wedding day, teaching neighborhood kids to ride their bikes on this pavement, hosting barbecues where everyone said we had the perfect marriage. Cassandra saw me coming and moved to stand directly in front of the door, arms folded. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I need to get my personal belongings," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "My photo albums, some jewelry that belonged to my family." She let out a sharp, cold laugh that cut through the rain. "Ruben said you might try this. He told me not to let you in." "Those are my things," I protested, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Some of them have been in my family for generations." "Your family?" She tilted her head, studying me like some odd museum piece. "Honey, you don't have anything. Look at you, standing in the rain like a beggar. You really are a complete failure, aren't you?" Her words hit harder than the icy rain soaking through my jacket. A failure. Was that what I'd become? I thought about my life. 30 years of supporting Ruben's ambitions, running our home, giving up my own dreams so he could chase his. And this was all I had to show for it. "Please," I whispered, hating the desperation in my own voice. "Just my grandmother's ring. It's in the jewelry box upstairs. It's worthless to anyone but me." Cassandra's smile turned cruel. "Worthless? That sounds about right." Her gaze traveled over me, from my worn-out shoes to my old jacket, to the gray in my hair I hadn't been able to afford to color in months. "You know what's funny?" she said. "Ruben told me you used to think you were so important, the queen of your little social circle, and now look at you." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the rain hide my tears. She wasn't entirely wrong. I had believed I was important once. That my marriage mattered, that my work for our business mattered, that I mattered. How wrong I'd been, I thought. The answer is no. Cassandra said briskly. "Now get off our property before I call the police." Our property. My home of 30 years was now their property. I turned and walked back down the driveway, my shoes squelching in the puddles. Behind me, the door slammed shut with a final, echoing thud. Back in the Honda, I sat for a long moment, my hands shaking from the cold and the humiliation. I had nowhere to go. The motel I'd been staying at had thrown me out that morning when I couldn't pay for another week. I had exactly $367 in my wallet. Not enough for gas, not enough for food, not enough for anything. I pulled my old flip phone from my purse, the screen still cracked from when I dropped it last week. Most of my contacts were useless now, friends who had taken Ruben's side, business associates who refused to answer my calls. But there was one number I had never deleted, even though I hadn't dialed it in over 40 years. Marcus Chen, my first love, my high school boyfriend, the boy who'd held my hand our senior year and promised he'd love me forever, before life dragged us in different directions. Over the years I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd done incredibly well for himself. Something about hotels and investments, but we'd lost touch completely when I married Ruben and moved across the country. Now, sitting in my broken-down car in the rain with my last few dollars weighing down my purse, I found myself calling him. It was probably a disconnected number. He probably wouldn't even remember me, but it was the only call I felt I had left to make. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered, deeper now, but still undeniably his. "Hello? Marcus." My voice cracked. This is Adrian. Adrian Morrison from Jefferson High School. I don't know if you remember me, but Adrian." The way he said my name, soft, warm, brought tears instantly to my eyes. "Of course I remember you. Are you okay? You sound—" I let out a shaky breath. "I'm not okay, Marcus. I'm not okay at all." And then everything poured out. The divorce, the eviction, being left with nothing. Sitting in the rain outside the home I'd lived in for 30 years. Being called a failure by a woman young enough to be my daughter. There was a long pause on the other end. "Where are you right now?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly sharp with concern. I gave him the address. He went silent for a moment. "Don't move," he said at last. "I'm coming to get you." "Marcus, you don't have to—" "Adrian," he interrupted, firm and steady. "You called me. That means something. Don't move." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, wondering what I had just done. What could I possibly expect from a man I hadn't spoken to in over 40 years? But as I sat alone in the cold rain, staring at the warm-lit windows of my former home, I realized I didn't have anything left to lose. 20 minutes later, headlights turned onto the street. But it wasn't just one car. It was an entire convoy, sleek, black, impossibly expensive vehicles moving in perfect unison. The lead car, a gleaming Bentley, reflected the streetlights even through the rain. Behind it, 2 identical Range Rovers. My heart hammered in my chest. This couldn't be Marcus. There had to be some mistake. But then the Bentley's driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. His coat probably cost more than my car. His graying hair was still thick, his shoulders broader than they had been at 17. But his gait, his presence, that was undeniably him. Marcus Chen, my high school sweetheart, the boy who used to walk me home after class, now looked like a man who could buy the entire neighborhood without blinking. He walked straight to my Honda and tapped on the window. When I rolled it down, he leaned in, those same brown eyes fixed on me, though now edged with concern and something else, something warm. "Get in my car, Adrian," he said softly. "Let's go home." I stared up at him, frozen. This couldn't be real. The Marcus I knew had been a sweet, hard-working teenager helping at his uncle's restaurant on weekends, dreaming of opening a little business someday. The man in front of me was someone with a security detail. "Adrian," he said again gently. "Come on. You're soaked." Movement flickered at the house. The curtains shifted. Someone was watching, Cassandra, no doubt, trying to figure out what was happening. A small part of me wanted to stay in the safety of my old car, afraid to make this moment bigger than it already was. But Marcus opened my door himself. He reached out his hand, and when his fingers wrapped around mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. "My things," I murmured, gesturing toward the small duffel bag in my back seat. Everything I owned was inside it. "You'll get your things," Marcus assured me calmly. He nodded once to a man who had stepped out of one of the Range Rovers, tall and immaculately dressed. The man immediately retrieved my bag. Marcus guided me to the Bentley. The moment I stepped inside, warmth enveloped me, soft leather, ambient lighting, a world away from my freezing Honda. As soon as I settled in, Marcus slid into the seat beside me. One of his men took the driver's place. "Sir," the driver said. "Should we proceed?" "Not yet," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the house. "Give me a moment." That was when the front door burst open again. Cassandra stepped outside, no longer draped in the silk robe. She'd put on jeans and a sweater, apparently realizing that whoever traveled in a fleet of luxury cars wasn't someone you greeted in sleepwear. Behind her, Reuben appeared, his expression tangled with confusion. He said something to Cassandra, who pointed toward the Bentley. "They're coming outside," I whispered. Marcus nodded, then turned to me. "Adrian, before we do this, there's something you should know." I held my breath. "I've been keeping track of your life from a distance for years," he said quietly. "I know what Reuben did to you. I know none of it was right." "Following my life?" I asked, stunned. He nodded. "I never forgot you." A pause. "About 10 years ago, I hired a private investigator. I learned you were married, running a business, and I learned your husband was systematically stealing from you." The words hit me like a blow. "Stealing from me?" "We'll talk about that later," Marcus said gently. "Right now, I need you to sit here and watch while I speak to your ex-husband." Before I could ask another question, he stepped out of the car. I watched through the streaked window as he walked up the driveway, confident, calm, purposeful. Reuben and Cassandra met him halfway. Even from the car, the dynamic shifted instantly. Reuben, who had always puffed himself up to dominate any room, suddenly seemed small. Standing next to Marcus, he almost shrank. Marcus spoke first, something too soft for me to hear. Reuben responded, raising his voice, his shoulders tense. Cassandra stepped closer, trying to form a united front, though her eyes kept darting toward the luxury vehicles. Marcus said something else. Reuben's entire posture changed. His shoulders slumped, his face drained of color. Grabbed his arm, steadying him. Whatever grabbed his arm, steadying him. Whatever Marcus was saying. It was devastating, my ex-husband. And for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of power returning to me. Finally, Marcus turned and walked back to the car. When he slid in beside me, his expression was a mix of satisfaction and something darker. "What did you say to him?" I asked. Marcus looked straight at me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw steel in those gentle brown eyes. "I said 3 words," he replied. "She's with me." That was it. That was all it took. Marcus leaned back as the driver started the engine. "You see, Adrian," he continued, "your ex-husband knows exactly who I am. He's known for years that Marcus Chen owns the Chen Hotel Group. What he didn't know until tonight was that Marcus Chen is the boy who loved Adrian Morrison in high school, and that I've been watching how he treated you for a very long time." As we pulled away from the house, I glanced back through the rear window. Reuben and Cassandra were still standing in the driveway, both of them staring after the departing convoy. Reuben looked like a man who had just realized he'd made a fatal miscalculation. "The Chen Hotel Group," I repeated, the name finally clicking into place. "That's you?" Marcus nodded. 43 hotels across the western United States. We just broke ground on our first international property in Vancouver last month. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the boy I'd once known with the powerful man sitting beside me. "Marcus, I had no idea. When we lost touch, I always wondered what happened to you, but I never—" I know, he said softly. I kept tabs on you, but I never reached out. You were married. From the outside, you looked happy. It wasn't until I started seeing irregularities in your husband's business dealings that I realized how wrong I was. What kind of irregularities? I asked. Marcus hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a tablet. He tapped a few times and handed it to me. Your maiden name was Morrison, right? Your father was James Morrison. Yes, I said. He died when I was 22, right after I married Reuben. The memory still hurt. My father had never liked Reuben, had warned me something was wrong with the man I was about to marry. We'd argued, and he'd died in a car accident before we could make peace. Your father owned Morrison Development, Marcus said gently. It was a small company, but it held the rights to several valuable commercial properties downtown. I looked down at the tablet screen, documents, contracts, signatures that meant nothing to me. I don't understand, I whispered. Reuben told me my father died in debt. He said the company was worthless. Marcus's jaw tightened. Your father's company was worth approximately $2.3 million when he died, he said quietly. You were his sole heir. The world tilted. That's not possible, I protested. Reuben showed me paperwork. There were debts, creditors. Reuben forged documents, Marcus said. He convinced you to sign over power of attorney while you were grieving, then systematically transferred all of your father's assets into his own name. The company you thought the two of you built together? It was built on land that belonged to you. Henderson and Associates exists because Reuben stole your inheritance and used it as seed money. I felt sick. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of pouring myself into what I believed was our shared dream, and it had all been built on theft, on my theft. How do you know all this? I asked, my voice barely audible. Because 5 years ago, when I was looking to expand into commercial real estate, I tried to buy some of that downtown property, Marcus explained. During the due diligence process, my lawyers uncovered irregularities in the ownership transfers. Your father's signature on several key documents was forged. The car slowed and stopped. I looked up and saw we were parked in front of a sleek glass tower stretching into the night sky. A discreet sign near the entrance read, Chen Hotel Group, Corporate Headquarters. Why didn't you contact me then? I asked. Why wait until now? Marcus turned to face me fully. Because you were still married to him, he said. If I'd come to you 5 years ago and told you your husband was a criminal who stole your inheritance, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was some jealous ex-boyfriend trying to ruin your marriage? He was right. We both knew it. 5 years ago, I still believed in my marriage. I still trusted Reuben completely. I would have thought Marcus was lying or crazy. But now, Marcus continued, now you've seen who he really is. Now you're ready to hear the truth. We sat in silence as his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Everything I had believed about my life fractured in front of me. My father hadn't died broke. He'd left me a legacy. Reuben had stolen it. The company I had worked so hard for had been built on money that should have been mine. Even my so-called poverty had been manufactured, created by a man who had methodically stripped me of everything I was entitled to. What happens now? I asked at last. Marcus smiled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the sweet boy I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Now, he said, we get your life back. All of it. As we walked into the gleaming lobby of his headquarters, I couldn't help glancing back toward the street, in the direction of my former home. I imagined Reuben and Cassandra still standing there trying to piece together what had just happened. They had no idea what was coming. But something told me they were about to find out. The elevator to Marcus's private office rose in near silence, the only sound the faint hum of the machinery. I stood beside him, still struggling to process everything he'd revealed. My father's company, my stolen inheritance, 30 years of lies. It felt like realizing my entire life had been written by someone else. Marcus's office took up the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a sweeping view of the city. In the distance, I could see the downtown blocks where my father's properties stood, properties that should have been mine. "Sit," Marcus said gently, guiding me toward a leather chair opposite his desk. "I know this is overwhelming. We'll take it one step at a time." He pressed a button on his desk, and within moments, a woman in her 50s appeared carrying a tray with a tea service. She set it down carefully, gave Marcus a meaningful, almost protective look, and slipped out without a word. "That's Elena, my assistant," Marcus explained, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "She's been with me for 15 years, completely trustworthy." I accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping my cold fingers around the warmth. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I need to understand something. You said you've been watching Ruben's business practices. What exactly did you find?" Marcus stood, opened a file cabinet behind his desk, and pulled out a thick folder. When he placed it in front of me, my breath caught. My name was written neatly on the tab. "Everything's in here," he said, "but let me start with the basics." He opened the folder and took out what looked like an official legal document. "This is your father's original will," he said. "He left everything to you, the company, the properties, even a small trust fund that was supposed to give you a monthly income." I stared at the paper, recognizing my father's signature instantly. "But Ruben showed me a different will," I murmured, "one that said my father had debts." "Forged," Marcus said simply. "Look." He placed a second document beside the first. "This is what Ruben submitted to the probate court. Notice the signature. The J in James is shaped differently. The loops in the M of Morrison don't match. Even to my untrained eye, I could see it now. The differences were subtle, but they were there." "How did he get away with this?" I asked, stunned. "Didn't anyone verify anything?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Your father died in a car accident on a Friday evening," he said. "Ruben filed these papers the following Monday, claiming you were too distraught to handle legal matters. He presented himself as the devoted husband, stepping in to take care of everything so you could grieve." The memory surged back with frightening clarity. The shock, the crushing guilt from our last argument about Ruben, the way I'd barely been able to function, and Ruben, calm and controlled, telling me to let him handle the boring paperwork. I had signed whatever he put in front of me, grateful not to have to think. "He planned this," I whispered. "My father's death. It was convenient for him." "I don't believe he caused the accident," Marcus said carefully. "But yes, he certainly took advantage of it. Look at this." He pulled out a page marked with dates, a timeline. "Your father died on Friday, March 15th, 1991, he said. "Ruben filed the forged will on Monday, March 18th. But here's the important part. He'd already contacted several potential buyers about your father's properties. The earliest inquiry is dated March 10th, 5 days before your father died." My blood went cold. "He was planning to take everything before my father was even gone," I breathed. Marcus nodded grimly. "It gets worse." He pulled out more documents. "After he convinced you to sign over power of attorney, he used your father's properties as collateral for business loans. On paper, you were listed as a co-owner of Henderson and Associates, but through shell companies and transfers, all the actual assets ended up in his name alone. He laid out loan applications, property transfer records, corporate filings, each one documenting how Ruben had quietly moved my inheritance out of my reach while making it look like we were building a future together." "For 30 years, Marcus said, "you've been working to grow a business that was founded on property that belonged to you. Every success Henderson and Associates enjoyed was built on your stolen legacy." I set my teacup down, my hands trembling. "The house," I whispered. "Our house. Where did the money come from to buy it?" Marcus glanced at another page. "Purchased with proceeds from the sale of one of your father's downtown properties," he said. "The deed was put in Ruben's name only, even though the money came from your inheritance." I thought about all the years I'd believed we were barely scraping by. All the times I'd gone without, taken extra responsibilities, cut corners, and sacrificed my own needs so Ruben could invest in the business, all while he was sitting on millions that should have been mine. "Why did you wait so long to tell me?" I asked. You said you found all this 5 years ago. Marcus was quiet for a long time, looking out at the city lights. Because I loved you once, Adrienne, he said finally, more than I've ever loved anyone. When I discovered what he'd done, my first instinct was to destroy him. I had everything I needed to have him arrested, to expose it all. But you didn't? I said softly. No, he agreed, because I realized destroying Ruben wouldn't automatically help you. You were still married to him. You still believed in your life together. If I'd exposed him back then, you would have lost your home, your business, everything you cherished, and you wouldn't have understood why. You would have seen me as the villain who ruined your marriage. He was right. 5 years ago, if someone had told me Ruben was a thief, I would have defended him with everything I had. I would have called it a smear campaign, a mistake, a setup. So you waited, I said quietly. I waited, Marcus confirmed. I watched. I kept hoping I was wrong, that he'd treat you better, that he'd finally act like the man you believed he was. He turned back to me, his eyes full of regret. But he didn't, he said. He got worse. And when I heard through mutual contacts that he was planning to leave you, I knew it was time. Mutual contacts? I asked. Marcus hesitated, then pulled out another, even thicker file. The private investigator I hired to keep an eye on you, he said slowly, also watched Ruben. We knew about Cassandra 6 months before you did. We knew he was planning to divorce you and leave you with nothing. He opened the file. We also knew something else. He slid a series of photos across the desk toward me. Ruben has been having affairs for over 20 years, Adrienne, he said gently. Cassandra isn't the first. She's just the youngest. The photographs were like knives. Ruben in restaurants, in hotel lobbies, in bars, at conferences, laughing, touching, kissing different women. Some were strangers. Others were disturbingly familiar. Women I had welcomed into my home. Women I had called friends. Others were unfamiliar. But then I froze. Mrs. Patterson, I whispered, staring at a photo. From the country club. She was at our anniversary party last year. Marcus nodded. He's been seeing her on and off for 8 years. He slid another photo toward me. This one showed Ruben with a woman I didn't recognize, but the timestamp made my stomach twist. Our 25th wedding anniversary weekend. The weekend he claimed he'd be at a business conference. I'd spent it alone, cooking his favorite meal and waiting for him to return. How many? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That we can confirm, Marcus said gently. 17 different women over the past 20 years. 17. I felt hollow, not just betrayed, humiliated. How had I missed the signs? How had I lived beside this man for 3 decades without seeing who he truly was? Marcus hesitated, then continued softly. There's more. The business is in trouble, serious trouble. A chill crept up my spine. What do you mean? Henderson and Associates is on the brink of bankruptcy. Ruben has been using company money to support multiple women. He's made disastrous investments and lost a significant amount in the stock market. The company's debts exceed its assets by roughly $800,000. My jaw dropped. 800? How is that even possible? He's been hiding it for 3 years, Marcus said, shuffling money between accounts, taking out loans against properties, even borrowing against future earnings. Creditors are beginning to close in. My mind raced. But that means, it means, Marcus said gently, that when he divorces you and keeps the company, he isn't keeping a valuable asset. He's keeping a sinking ship. He likely planned to declare bankruptcy after the divorce, leaving you penniless while he walks away clean with Cassandra. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Not only had Ruben stolen my inheritance, cheated on me, lied to me for decades, he had planned to abandon me with nothing but debt. But, Marcus continued, there's something he doesn't know. What? I asked. Marcus smiled, a razor-sharp, dangerous smile I'd never seen on him before. He doesn't know that for the last 2 years, I've been quietly buying up his debt. I blinked. Why would you do that? Because it means I control a majority of Henderson and Associates' outstanding loans. I can call those loans due whenever I wish, which means when the time comes, I can force him into bankruptcy, on my terms, not his. I sank back in my chair, stunned by the sheer scope of Marcus's planning. You've been orchestrating this for years, I whispered. I've been preparing for this, Marcus corrected gently. Tonight, when you called me, that's when it all began. He pulled out one final document and placed it in front of me. This is a lawsuit, he said. Fraud, forgery, theft. It outlines everything Ruben stole from you. Based on current property values, you're entitled to approximately $4.7 million. $4.7 million. The number didn't feel real. That doesn't include the value of Henderson and Associates, Marcus added. When you subtract the debts and factor in the legitimate assets, the company is still worth about $1.2 million. And since it was built using your father's stolen assets, it legally belongs to you. I looked at the mountain of evidence spread across his desk. You did all of this? For me? I asked softly. I did it because it's right, Marcus said. And because 30 years ago I promised I'd always protect you. I may have failed then, but I'm not failing now. I thought of Ruben and Cassandra standing in the driveway earlier, confused, blindsided, unaware that their world had just started to crumble. But then I thought of myself. For the first time in decades, I felt something warm flicker inside me. Hope. Hope for justice. Hope for freedom. Hope for a future where I didn't have to worry every single day. What happens next? I asked. Marcus closed the folder. Next, we file the lawsuit. We take this to court, and we get your life back. He paused, his eyes softening. But first, you need rest, food, strength. Cassandra saw a broken woman tonight, but that's not who you are. He reached out, touching my hand lightly. You're Adrian Morrison, and you're about to reclaim everything that was stolen from you. Hearing my maiden name, Morrison, something shifted inside me. A dormant part of myself stirred awake. I wasn't Ruben's discarded wife. I was James Morrison's daughter, and I was done being powerless. I drifted awake in what felt like a dream. The guest suite in Marcus's penthouse was larger than the entire motel room I'd been living in. Soft Egyptian cotton sheets cocooned me, and a sweeping view of the city stretched all the way to the distant mountains. For a moment, I forgot everything. Then it came rushing back. The rain, Cassandra's cruelty, Marcus's revelations. A soft knock sounded. Come in, I called, pulling the silk robe Marcus had given me around my shoulders. Elena entered with a breakfast tray and a gentle smile. Good morning, Mrs. Henderson, she said. Mr. Chen wanted me to let you know he's in meetings this morning, but he'd like to see you in his office at 2 o'clock, if that works for you. It's Morrison, I corrected instinctively, then paused. Actually, legally, I suppose it's still Henderson for now. Elena's smile widened, warm and knowing. Mr. Chen mentioned that might change soon, Elena said with a soft smile. He also asked me to take you shopping this morning, if you're interested. He thought you might want some new clothes before your meetings begin. I glanced down at the outfit I'd worn the day before, now freshly cleaned and pressed by Marcus's housekeeper. It was the nicest thing I owned, and it still looked tired and outdated. It was clearly not enough for whatever my life was about to become. I don't have money for shopping, I said quietly. That's been taken care of, Elena assured me. Mr. Chen has opened a temporary account for your immediate needs. He said to tell you it's simply an advance on what's rightfully yours anyway. 2 hours later, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in an upscale boutique, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. The navy suit Elena had chosen was perfectly tailored. It made me look sharp, capable, like a woman who might walk into a boardroom and expect people to listen. My hair had been styled at the salon next door, and for the first time in months, the gray I hadn't been able to afford to color was gone. You look powerful, Elena said approvingly, like someone who belongs at the head of the table. I did feel powerful, and strangely unfamiliar to myself. For so long I'd been dressing to stretch every garment just a little bit longer, not to impress anyone. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who could demand answers, and get them. When we returned to Marcus's office building, he was waiting in the conference room next to his office. He'd changed into a fresh suit, and the long mahogany table was covered with documents, photographs, and what looked like a meticulous timeline. "You look beautiful," he said as I stepped inside. The way he said it made me think he truly meant it. "Thank you for the clothes," I replied, "and for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Marcus shook his head. "You're not repaying me, Adrienne. I'm just helping you reclaim what was always yours." He gestured for me to sit and pointed to the papers laid out in front of us. "I've been refining our strategy this morning," he said. "I want you to see exactly what we're going to do." He pulled out my chair, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt prepared to face what was coming. "First," Marcus began, "we'll file the civil lawsuit against Ruben for fraud and theft. That process could take 6 to 8 months before we get a final judgment, but we're not going to sit around waiting for that." He motioned toward a stack of documents on the left. "These are the papers to call in the loans I've been buying. As of this morning, I own 63% of Henderson and Associates' debt. I can legally demand immediate repayment." "And when Ruben can't pay?" I asked. "The company will be forced into bankruptcy," Marcus said, "but here's where it gets interesting. As the primary creditor, I'll have significant influence over how that bankruptcy unfolds. I can push for the company's assets to be sold to satisfy the debt." I began to follow his logic. "And you'd be in a position to buy those assets." "Not me," Marcus corrected. "You." He pulled out another set of papers and slid them toward me. "This morning, my lawyers set up a new company, Morrison Holdings. You are the sole owner and president." I stared at the incorporation documents, my name printed in bold letters as the head of the company. "Morrison Holdings," I murmured. "Your father had Morrison Development," Marcus said quietly. It felt right that Morrison Holdings should be the one to reclaim what Morrison Development built. His voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath it. "Through Morrison Holdings, you'll be able to bid on the assets when Henderson and Associates is liquidated. With my financial backing, you'll be the strongest bidder in the room." The elegance of the plan took my breath away. Instead of simply suing Ruben and waiting years, Marcus had designed a way to corner him almost immediately. "But won't Ruben realize that Morrison Holdings is me?" I asked. Marcus smiled. "Eventually. But by the time he does, the process will already be in motion, and he won't be able to stop it." He picked up his phone and showed me a number on the screen. "I think it's time we had a conversation with Cassandra," he said. My stomach clenched. "With Cassandra? Why?" "Because I don't think she knows the full truth about Ruben any more than you did," Marcus replied. "And I suspect that once she does, she may become our greatest ally." Before I could object, he was already dialing. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello? Is this Cassandra?" Marcus asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm calling about Ruben Henderson." There was a pause. "You're the man from last night," she said slowly, "with the cars." "That's right," Marcus said calmly. "I'd like to meet. There are some things about Ruben I think you should know." Her tone sharpened with suspicion. "What kind of things?" Marcus glanced at me. I gave a small nod. If we were going to do this, we had to go all the way. "Things about his other women," Marcus said plainly. "And about his debts. Things that may affect your future with him." The silence stretched on so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, Cassandra spoke again, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What other women?" "I'd rather explain in person," Marcus said. "Can you meet us this afternoon? 4 o'clock at the Fairmont Hotel downtown. The restaurant on the second floor." She hesitated. "Yes, I'll be there." When Marcus ended the call, I looked at him, torn. "Are you sure about this? Yesterday she was calling me a failure. Today we're trying to turn her into an ally." "Yesterday she thought she was winning," Marcus said simply. "Today she's going to realize she's just another victim. People change when they understand they're not competing with you anymore. They're standing beside you. The Fairmont Hotel was one of the most elegant places in the city, the kind of place Ruben always told me we couldn't afford. As Marcus and I waited in the restaurant, I felt a kind of nervous I hadn't felt since high school. What exactly do you say to the woman who humiliated you in the rain just 24 hours earlier? Cassandra arrived right at 4 o'clock. I had to admit, she looked different. Unsure, almost fragile. The smug confidence from the night before was gone. She'd dressed carefully in a conservative dress and jacket, like someone showing up for a job interview or a court date. Someone who understood this meeting mattered. She approached our table slowly, her eyes flicking between Marcus and me. "I wasn't sure you'd actually be here," she said to me. "Sit down, Cassandra," Marcus said gently. "We have a lot to talk about." She sat, but only on the edge of the chair, like she might bolt at any moment. "Before you say anything," she said, looking straight at me, "I want you to know, I'm not proud of how I treated you last night." I blinked. An apology was the last thing I'd expected. "Ruben told me you were bitter about the divorce," she went on. "He said you were trying to cause trouble. He made it sound like you were just being vindictive." "And now?" I asked quietly. Now her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Now, I'm starting to think Ruben tells people whatever he needs them to believe." Marcus leaned forward. "What changed since last night?" Cassandra glanced around the restaurant, then pulled out her phone. "I found something this morning," she said. "On his laptop. He left it open." She turned the screen toward us. An email thread was visible between Ruben and someone named D. Martinez. The exchange was short, but devastating. R. "The old situation is handled. Adrian signed the papers and she's out." D. "Good. What about the new girl?" R. "Cassandra. She's useful for now. Pretty, young, doesn't ask questions, but she's not long-term material any more than the others were." D. "How long before you're ready to move on?" R. "Give me 6 months to get the finances sorted, then I'll probably need a change of scenery." Cassandra's hands trembled as she set the phone down. "There have been others, haven't there?" she asked, her eyes glistening. Marcus and I exchanged a glance. Then Marcus opened his briefcase and took out a different folder from the one he'd shown me the night before. 17 that we know of," he said gently, "over the past 20 years. Cassandra went pale. 20 years? She choked out. "He told me I was the first, that his marriage was dead, that he'd never cheated before, that I was special." "It's what he tells all of them," Marcus said quietly. He opened the folder and showed her several of the photos, not to humiliate her, but so she could see the truth for herself. "Cassandra," he said, "you're not the villain here. You're another victim." Tears spilled over. "I left my job for him. I moved across the country. I thought we were building a life together." "What did you do before?" I asked. My anger toward her was already shifting into something else. Recognition, maybe. "I was a paralegal in Seattle," she said. "I had my own apartment, my own life. When Ruben asked me to move here, told me we'd get married as soon as his divorce was final, I gave it all up." The parallel to my own story was painfully clear. Ruben had convinced her to surrender her independence, just as he'd convinced me to sign away my power of attorney while I was drowning in grief. "Cassandra," Marcus said, laying more papers on the table, "there's something else you need to understand. Ruben is going bankrupt. The company, the house, everything is built on debt. He was planning to leave you with nothing, just like he did to Adrian." Her eyes widened. "But he said we were rich. He said the divorce settlement would be minimal because Adrian never contributed anything to the business." "Adrian built that business with her stolen inheritance," Marcus said firmly. "Every asset he claims as his was bought using money that belonged to her father." He showed her the financial records. "The house is mortgaged beyond its value. He owes more than it's worth. Even if you married him tomorrow, you'd be marrying into massive debt, not wealth." Cassandra stared at the documents, horror spreading across her face. "He said I'd be taken care of," she whispered. He said we were starting fresh. All this time, I thought I'd won. I watched her process it all. The realization that she wasn't the triumphant other woman, but just the latest target in a long-running con. Her expression shifted from shock to anger, to something harder. "What happens to me now?" she asked quietly. Marcus and I exchanged a look. This was the turning point, the moment that would decide if Cassandra became our ally or stayed on Reuben's sinking ship. "That depends," I said carefully, "on whether you want to help us expose the truth or whether you want to go down with Reuben when his house of cards collapses." Cassandra dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. When she looked up again, there was a new resolve in her gaze. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. 3 weeks later, I stood in the marble-floored lobby of the courthouse, wearing a charcoal suit that made me feel like the successful businesswoman I used to be, and was about to be again. Marcus stood beside me, calm as ever, while our team of lawyers sorted through briefcases and files. But the person I was most grateful to have at my side was Cassandra. In the weeks since that meeting at the Fairmont, she had become not just an ally, but something I never thought possible. A friend. She'd moved out of my former house and into one of Marcus's corporate apartments while she figured out her next steps. More importantly, she'd given us information from Reuben's emails, documents, and conversations that made our case airtight. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked quietly as we watched Reuben and his lawyer walk through the opposite doors. "I've been ready for 30 years, I said, and I meant it. Reuben looked ruined. I'd never seen him like that. The perfectly groomed man I'd once known was gone. His usually polished hair was unkempt, his expensive suit looked wrinkled and slept in. When his eyes met mine across the lobby, for the first time in my life, I saw something in them I had never seen before. Fear. The last 3 weeks had not been kind to him, and they were about to get much worse. Marcus had methodically called in the loans he owned, demanding immediate repayment of more than $600,000. When Reuben couldn't pay, Henderson and Associates was forced into emergency bankruptcy proceedings. Its assets were now being liquidated, and Reuben himself was staring down personal bankruptcy. But that was only the financial blow. The real destruction came from Cassandra. She had agreed to testify about what she'd found on Reuben's computer, not just the email about her being temporary, but financial documents showing he'd been hiding assets from me throughout the divorce. She had also provided recordings of conversations where Reuben openly bragged about manipulating me and about stealing my inheritance. "He thought I was stupid," Cassandra had said to me during one of our strategy meetings. "He thought I was just a pretty face who wouldn't ask questions, but I have a paralegal degree, I know how to read financial documents, and I recorded our conversations because I was planning to make him a scrapbook of our relationship." Instead, those recordings became evidence of fraud, forgery, and theft. The bankruptcy hearing. The hearing began with the judge reviewing the basic facts. Henderson and Associates owed roughly $800,000. The largest portion of that debt, 63%, belonged to companies owned by Marcus. Its assets totaled about $1.4 million. On paper, enough to pay the debts. However, the judge lifted his eyes from the documents. "There are serious questions," he said, "about how this company acquired its initial assets." Reuben shifted in his chair. Our lead attorney, David Chen, Marcus's younger brother and one of the most respected corporate lawyers in the state, stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Henderson and Associates was founded using assets stolen from the estate of James Morrison, who died in 1991. Mr. Henderson forged documents to steal approximately $2.3 million from Mr. Morrison's daughter, Adrienne Henderson, who is present in court today." The judge's eyebrows rose. "That is a serious allegation, Mr. Chen." David nodded. "We have extensive documentation. Handwriting experts have confirmed that key signatures were forged. We also have witness testimony from Ms. Cassandra Webb, who was living with Mr. Henderson and can describe his admissions of guilt." Reuben's lawyer, clearly outmatched and unprepared for the scale of evidence, stumbled to his feet. Your Honor, these allegations are unsubstantiated attempts to complicate what should be a straightforward bankruptcy. I'd like to hear the evidence, the judge said sharply. For the next 2 hours, David Chen dismantled Ruben's life piece by piece. The forged documents were displayed on large monitors, with handwriting analysts pointing out the subtle differences that proved they were fakes. Financial records showed exactly how Ruben had used my father's properties as collateral for loans and then moved the ownership into his name through shell companies. But the most devastating blow came from Cassandra. She took the witness stand wearing a simple blue dress, her voice steady despite the weight of her testimony. She read from emails where Ruben bragged about handling me. She played recordings where he laughed about my naivety, where he discussed disappearing once the divorce was finalized. He told me Adrienne contributed nothing to the business, Cassandra testified. He said she was just a housewife who didn't understand finance. He made her sound like a burden he carried for 30 years. And what did you discover about the true origins of the business? David asked. That it was built entirely on properties belonging to Adrienne's father, Cassandra said. That Ruben forged documents to steal her inheritance, and that he was planning to abandon me the same way he abandoned her, after taking everything and leaving his victim with nothing but debt. Ruben's color drained from his face. His attorney leaned close, whispering frantically, no doubt telling him the truth was inescapable now. But David wasn't finished. Your Honor, he said, holding up another set of documents, we also have evidence that the defendant has a long-term pattern of using and discarding women for financial gain or access to resources. He displayed photos, receipts, messages, patterns. 17 extramarital affairs over 20 years, he continued, several involving women whom he manipulated into providing him with financial support or business connections. Ruben's lawyer weakly muttered, "Objection. Relevance?" "It speaks to character," David said calmly. "This is not a one-time mistake. This is decades of deliberate fraud and emotional manipulation." "Overruled," the judge said. "Continue." By the time the evidence ended, Ruben looked like a man already defeated. During the recess, the judge called a recess to review the documents more closely. Marcus, Cassandra, and I retreated to a small conference room. "How do you think it went?" Cassandra asked, twisting her hands nervously. "Better than I dared hope," Marcus said. "David was brilliant. The evidence is irrefutable." I stood beside the window, looking at the city below, thinking about everything that had happened in only 3 weeks. I was no longer the woman who sat in a rain-soaked Honda, begging for her grandmother's ring. I was James Morrison's daughter. I was someone who deserved justice, someone who was fighting back. The judge returns. When we walked back into the courtroom, the judge's face was stern, composed, unreadable. "I have reviewed all of the evidence presented today," he said slowly, "and I find it compelling and credible." The room fell silent. Ruben swallowed hard. And for the first time in 30 years, I was not the one who was afraid. Marcus had methodically called in the loans he controlled, demanding immediate repayment of more than $600,000. When Ruben couldn't pay, Henderson and Associates was forced into emergency bankruptcy. The company's assets were being liquidated, and Ruben was now facing personal bankruptcy as well. But that was only the financial blow. The real destruction came from Cassandra. She had agreed to testify about the documents she'd found on Ruben's computer, not just the email calling her temporary, but financial records proving he'd been hiding assets from me during the divorce. She also provided recordings of conversations where Ruben openly bragged about manipulating me and stealing my inheritance. "He thought I was stupid," Cassandra had said during one of our strategy meetings. "He thought I was just a pretty face who wouldn't ask questions. But I have a paralegal degree. I know how to read financial documents, and I recorded our conversations because I was going to surprise him with a scrapbook of our relationship. Instead, those recordings became evidence of fraud, forgery, and theft. The bankruptcy hearing began with the judge summarizing the basic facts. Henderson and Associates owed about $800,000 to various creditors, with Marcus's companies holding the largest share of that debt. The firm's assets were valued at roughly $1.4 million, enough, in theory, to pay off what was owed and leave something behind. However, the judge went on, scanning the paperwork in front of him, there are serious questions about how this company acquired its initial assets. Reuben shifted in his chair. Our lead attorney, David Chen, Marcus's younger brother and one of the top corporate lawyers in the state, rose to address the court. Your Honor, we have evidence that Henderson and Associates was founded using assets stolen from the estate of James Morrison, who died in 1991. Mr. Henderson forged documents to steal approximately $2.3 million from Mr. Morrison's daughter, Adrienne Henderson, who is present in court today. The judge's brows lifted. That is a serious allegation, Mr. Chen. We have extensive documentation, Your Honor, David replied. Handwriting analysis confirms that key signatures on estate documents were forged. We also have witness testimony, including that of Ms. Cassandra Webb, who was living with Mr. Henderson and can testify to his admissions of guilt. Reuben's lawyer, a nervous man who clearly wasn't prepared for the avalanche of evidence, scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated attempts to complicate what should be a straightforward bankruptcy proceeding. I'd like to hear the evidence, the judge interrupted firmly. For the next 2 hours, David laid everything out. The forged documents were displayed on large screens, while handwriting experts pointed out clear differences between the real signatures and the fakes. Financial records traced how Reuben had used my father's properties as collateral for loans, then transferred ownership into his own name through shell companies. But the most devastating testimony came from Cassandra. She took the stand in a simple blue dress, her voice clear and steady as she described what she'd found in Reuben's files. She read emails where he boasted about handling me and keeping the business in the right hands. She played recordings of him laughing about my naivety and outlining his plans to disappear once the divorce was finalized. He told me Adrienne had contributed nothing to the business, Cassandra said. He said she was just a housewife who didn't understand finance or real estate. He made her sound like a burden he'd carried for 30 years. And what did you discover about the true origins of the business? David asked. That it was built entirely on properties that belonged to Adrienne's father, Cassandra answered. That Reuben forged documents to steal her inheritance, and that he planned to abandon me the same way he abandoned her, after taking everything and leaving his victim with nothing but debt. Reuben's face went from pale to gray. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, clearly realizing how hopeless their position had become. Then came the final blow. Your Honor, David said, the defendant has a pattern of using and discarding women once he has accessed their resources or used them to support his schemes. We have documented 17 extramarital relationships over 20 years, including several where Mr. Henderson persuaded women to provide him with money or business connections. Objection, Reuben's lawyer said weakly. Relevance? It goes to the defendant's character and his ongoing pattern of fraudulent behavior, David replied. This is not a one-time mistake. It is a decades-long scheme built on lies and manipulation. Overruled, the judge said. Continue. When all the evidence had finally been presented, the judge called a recess to review the materials. Marcus, Cassandra, and I returned to a small conference room while the lawyers talked strategy. How do you think it went? Cassandra asked, wringing her hands. Better than I hoped, Marcus said calmly. David was brilliant. The evidence speaks for itself. I stared out the window at the city. In just 3 weeks, my entire world had changed. I was no longer the woman standing in the rain outside a house I no longer owned, begging for my grandmother's ring. I was James Morrison's daughter, and I was fighting back. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression was grave. I have reviewed all the evidence presented today, he began, and I find it compelling and credible. The documentation clearly shows that Henderson and Associates was founded using assets obtained through fraud and forgery. He turned toward Reuben. Mr. Henderson, do you have anything to say in your defense? Reuben rose slowly. His lawyer looked defeated, but Reuben still tried one last performance. Your Honor, he began, using that same polished charm that had once fooled me completely. I understand how this looks, but you have to consider the context. Adrian was grieving her father's death. She wasn't in any condition to handle complex financial matters. I was trying to protect her, to make sure the business would be stable and successful. Everything I did was for our family. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Even now, with mountains of evidence against him, he was still trying to present himself as my protector. Something inside me broke. Before I even realized I'd made the decision, I was standing. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" I asked. The judge looked surprised. "Mrs. Henderson, you're not scheduled to testify, but if you'd like to make a brief statement, I'll allow it." "Thank you," I said. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the storm of emotion inside me. "For 30 years, I believed the man I married was protecting me," I began. "I believed that when he took over the finances, it was because he loved me. I believed that when he made decisions about our business, it was because he was wiser and more experienced." I turned to look directly at Reuben. "But protecting someone does not mean forging her father's will. Love does not mean stealing her inheritance and lying about it for 3 decades. And wisdom does not mean planning to abandon your wife with nothing but debt while you run off with a younger woman." Reuben's face crumpled, the confident mask finally breaking. For the first time, I didn't see the charismatic man who had controlled my life, but a weak, selfish person who had built everything on lies. "I trusted you completely," I continued. "I signed every paper you put in front of me because I believed we were partners. I worked beside you for 30 years because I thought we were building something together." I shook my head. "But we weren't building anything. You were just stealing from me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for justice. I want what belonged to my father, what should have been mine all along, and I want to make sure that Reuben Henderson never has the chance to do this to another woman again." When I sat down, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Reuben's lawyer had nothing to say. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," the judge said at last. "I've heard enough." He shuffled his papers, then looked up, his expression firm. "I find that Henderson and Associates was indeed founded using assets obtained through fraud and theft. I am ordering the immediate liquidation of all company assets. The proceeds will first be used to pay legitimate creditors, and then to provide restitution to Mrs. Henderson for her stolen inheritance." Reuben slumped in his chair. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. The evidence of forgery and fraud is overwhelming and appears to warrant criminal charges." He fixed Reuben with a hard stare. "Mr. Henderson, you have 48 hours to vacate the house on Maple Street. It was purchased using fraudulently obtained funds and must be sold as part of restitution. You should consider yourself fortunate that Mrs. Henderson has shown remarkable restraint in not pursuing the maximum penalties available under the law." When we stepped outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathered. Cameras flashed. Microphones appeared in front of me. "Mrs. Henderson, how does it feel to get your inheritance back?" one of them called out. I paused, choosing my words. "It feels like justice," I said simply. "What will you do now?" another asked. I glanced at Marcus, who gave me an encouraging smile. "I'm going to do what my father would have wanted," I replied. "I'm going to build something real, something honest, something I can be proud of." As we walked away, Cassandra fell into step beside me. "What happens to me now?" she asked quietly. "What do you want to happen?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "I want to go back to being a paralegal. I want to use my skills to help people, not be someone's decoration." Marcus overheard and turned back with interest. "Morrison Holdings is going to need a legal department as we grow," he said. "We'll need someone with experience in real estate law and corporate documentation." Cassandra's eyes widened. "You'd hire me, after everything?" "You helped us expose the truth," I told her. "You chose to do the right thing when staying silent would have been easier. That's exactly the kind of person I want working for my company." 3 days later, I stood in the driveway of my former house, watching a moving truck carry away Reuben's things. He came out the front door with a single suitcase, looking older than I had ever seen him. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "I suppose you're satisfied now?" he said bitterly. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm not satisfied. I'm free. There's a difference." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You always were too good for your own good, Adrienne." "And you?" I said quietly. "Were never as clever as you thought you were." As his taxi pulled away, a weight lifted from my shoulders, one I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for decades. The house would be sold. The proceeds would go toward my restitution. Henderson and Associates would be dissolved, its legitimate assets transferred to Morrison Holdings. But more importantly, I was finally free of the man who had stolen 30 years of my life. Marcus appeared beside me and took my hand. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I looked at the house one last time, then at the man who had pulled up in the rain when I had nothing, and helped me reclaim everything. "Yes," I said, squeezing his hand. "Let's go home." "Yes," I said. "I'm ready to go home." 1 year later, I stood in the executive conference room of Morrison Holdings, looking out at a city skyline that now included 3 buildings that belonged to me. The morning sun cast long golden stripes across the mahogany table where I had just finished signing the acquisition papers for another piece of downtown property, the same property my father had dreamed of developing 40 years ago. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morrison," said David Chen, Marcus's brother and now my personal attorney. "This acquisition brings Morrison Holdings to $12.7 million in assets." I smiled, still touched every time someone used my maiden name. 6 months earlier, my divorce from Reuben had been finalized, and I had legally reclaimed the name Morrison. It felt like shedding the last remnant of a life that had never truly been mine. "Thank you, David. And please, call me Adrienne." The conference door opened, and Cassandra walked in carrying a stack of files. She had kept her promise to return to paralegal work, and surpassed every expectation. Her experience with Reuben's lies made her extraordinarily good at spotting inconsistencies in contracts and financial statements. "I have the final reports on the Henderson bankruptcy," she said, placing a folder in front of me. "The last assets were liquidated yesterday." I opened the file. After paying legitimate creditors and legal fees, the bankruptcy had yielded approximately $2.8 million in restitution, money that rightfully belonged to me. Combined with the value of my father's original properties and the explosive growth of Morrison Holdings over the past year, I now possessed more wealth than my father had ever dreamed. But more importantly, I felt alive again, stronger than I had in decades. "What happened to him?" I asked quietly, though a part of me wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Cassandra kept her expression neutral. "He's working as a sales associate at a used car lot in Phoenix. The criminal charges were dropped after he agreed to cooperate fully with restitution and accept a permanent ban from real estate and finance. It was a brutal fall for a man who had once controlled millions and strutted through conference rooms like he owned the world. But in my heart, I felt no triumph, only closure." A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Marcus stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile that had become my favorite part of every morning. "Good morning, ladies," he said warmly, setting a cup beside me. "Are we ready for the big announcement?" I took a steadying breath. Today was the day I would reveal something I'd been planning for months, something that honored my father's memory while building something entirely new. "I think so," I said. "Cassandra, can you call the staff meeting for 10? As she stepped out, Marcus sat beside me and took my hand. Our relationship over the past year had grown slowly, gently. We were older now, cautious, intentional, but the honesty and steadiness between us felt more real than anything I had known in my marriage. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "It's a big step." I looked down at the proposal in front of me. The official plan for the Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit offering legal aid and financial counseling to women who had suffered financial abuse. Funded by Morrison Holdings, staffed by attorneys and advocates, many of whom understood that kind of betrayal firsthand. "I've never been more certain of anything," I said. The announcement. At 10 o'clock, the entire Morrison Holdings team gathered in our main conference room. Only 12 people so far, but each one chosen for integrity, resilience, and talent. Many, like Cassandra, had overcome their own battles. I stood at the head of the table and looked at the faces that had become like family. Thank you all for your incredible work this year. Morrison Holdings has exceeded every projection, and it's because of your dedication. They smiled, but I knew they were waiting for the announcement. But business success was only part of my father's dream, I continued. James Morrison believed that when you were blessed with resources, you had a responsibility to help others build better lives. I paused. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Morrison Foundation. A ripple of excitement ran through the room as I explained its mission: legal aid, financial counseling, and support for women who'd faced the kind of manipulation and financial theft I had endured. Who will run it? Jennifer, our head of acquisitions, asked. Cassandra has agreed to serve as executive director, I said. Cassandra blushed, but she stood taller. She had transformed from the uncertain young woman Reuben manipulated into a confident professional who understood both the legal and emotional realities of financial abuse. When do we start? Asked Tom, our accountant. We already have, I said with a smile. Our first client is a woman named Patricia Williams. The room fell quiet, not with tension, but with purpose. It felt like the moment everything had come full circle. For the first time in decades, I wasn't reclaiming my past. I was building a future. She's 63 years old, and her own son has been systematically stealing from her, convincing her to sign over power of attorney while she was recovering from surgery. We're going to help her get her life back. The meeting went on for another hour as we worked through the logistics of running both a business and a foundation. But my mind kept drifting to the journey that had led me here, from standing in the rain outside a house I no longer owned to standing at the head of my conference table, surrounded by people who shared my values. After the staff meeting, Marcus and I drove across town for lunch. It was the same restaurant where we'd met Cassandra a year earlier, back when she was still Reuben's girlfriend and I was the wife he'd thrown away. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked as we waited for our food. Leaving your old life? I mean, even if it was built on lies, it was stable. Predictable. I thought about it honestly. There had been nights over the past year when the weight of responsibility felt almost crushing. The pressure of running a company, knowing my decisions affected my employees' lives and futures. Moments when I'd wondered if I was too old, too set in my ways to start over. But then I would remember the alternative, remember what it had been like to have no control, to rely completely on a man who saw me as little more than a resource to exploit. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. For the first time in 30 years, I'm living my life instead of someone else's version of what my life should be. Marcus smiled. Your father would be proud of you. I hope so, I said. I think about him every day. I wonder what Morrison Development might have become if Reuben hadn't stolen it. But maybe this is better. Maybe the Morrison Foundation is what he wanted all along. Our food arrived, and we ate in a comfortable silence. Outside the window, I could see the downtown district where my father's original properties had once stood. Most of them now belonged to Morrison Holdings. Instead of squeezing every dollar out of them, we'd turned them into affordable housing and community spaces. There's something I want to ask you, Marcus said when we'd finished. I looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped, but when he opened it, there wasn't a ring inside. There was a key. This is the key to the penthouse in the new Morrison Tower, he said. I was hoping you might want to share it with me, not as husband and wife. We've both learned to be cautious about legal entanglements, but as partners in every way that matters. I stared at the key, feeling suddenly unsteady. The Morrison Tower was the crown jewel of our portfolio, a beautifully restored Art Deco building with our headquarters and several luxury residences. The penthouse was supposed to be my home, but sharing it with Marcus turned it from a property into something else entirely. Are you sure? I asked. We're both set in our ways. I'm 62, Marcus. I've spent the last year finally learning who I am when I'm not trying to please someone else. Are you ready to share your space with a woman who's just discovered she can be stubborn? Marcus laughed. Adrienne, I fell in love with your stubbornness when we were 17. I'm not going to start complaining about it now. I picked up the key, feeling the cool weight of it in my palm. Then, yes, I said softly. I'd like that very much. On the drive back to the Morrison Holdings building, I thought about how far I'd come since that night in the rain, sitting in a broken-down Honda with $367 to my name. I'd thought I was calling Marcus for a lifeline. What I'd really done was reach for the life that was supposed to be mine all along. The car pulled up in front of our building, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. The Morrison Foundation would occupy the 3rd floor. Morrison Holdings was spread across floors 4 through 6, and Marcus and I would live on the 15th, partners in every sense of the word. Ready to go home? Marcus asked, echoing the same words he'd said a year before. Yes, I answered, taking his hand. I'm ready. As we walked through the lobby, I caught our reflection in the polished marble walls. 2 people who had found their way back to each other after 40 years, who had taken betrayal and loss and turned them into something strong and beautiful. At 62, I was finally living the life my father had imagined for me. Not just a successful one, but a meaningful one. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing in someone else's story, but writing my own. The elevator carried us up toward our new home, toward the life that had once been stolen and was now fully reclaimed through courage, truth, and love. Behind us, the city stretched out in every direction, full of opportunities I was only just beginning to explore. Ahead of us lay years of building the Morrison Foundation, helping other women reclaim their stolen lives, proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. And beside me was the man who had loved me when we were young, who had waited for me when we were apart, and who had stood by me while I learned to save myself. When the elevator doors opened into our penthouse, I understood something important. This wasn't the end of my old life or the beginning of a new one. This was simply the life I was always meant to live. Now I'm curious about you, the one who's listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to read your stories. And on the final screen, I've left 2 more of this channel's favorite stories. They might surprise you as much as mine did. Thank you for staying with me until the end.